the Ethiopian Educational Information and Communication Technology presents Educational Satellite Television Programs.
Hello, teacher. Hello, students. Welcome to today's lesson on diffusion. In our last lesson, we learned about permeability of the cell membrane. We discovered the cell membrane is semi-permeable, and we discussed the functions of the membrane. We also learned about the concept of concentration and defined the term concentration gradient. Today, we will learn about diffusion. We will define the process and discuss the concentration gradient of diffusion. Students, are you ready to begin? Diffusion describes when particles of a gas or substances in a solution spread out. Diffusion is the movement of particles from an area of high concentration to an area of lower concentration. Students, based on what we learned from our previous lesson, please explain the concept of concentration.
Students, let's get ready. Begin. Time's up. Let's get back to our lesson.
Hello, everyone. I hope you were able to recall the information we learned in our last lesson. Concentration is a way of measuring how many particles of a substance are in one place. In addition to concentration, we also learned about concentration gradient in our last lesson. The concentration gradient is defined as the difference in concentration between two areas. Typically, the greater the difference in concentration, the quicker the rate of diffusion will be. Diffusion happens because of random movements between particles in a solution. The particles move around and knock into one another. As the particles move randomly, more particles travel to the areas of low concentration. Therefore, the particles' overall movement is from areas of high concentration to areas of lower concentration. Concentration affects the rate of diffusion. Temperature also affects the rate of diffusion. If the temperature increases, the particles move quicker, creating more random movement. As random movement of particles speed up, diffusion will take place more rapidly. Let us use the example of copper sulfate diffusing in water. The blue circles represent copper sulfate, and the yellow circles represent water. As you can see, when the copper sulfate is added to the water, initially the copper sulfate does not mix with the water. As the copper sulfate particles begin to move and collide with one another, they start to mix with the water particles. The more the copper sulfate particles move randomly, the more they spread out. Ultimately, the copper sulfate particles mix with the water particles and diffusion is complete. Diffusion is a passive process. This means that diffusion does not require energy to take place. Since it takes place along the concentration gradient, which means it goes from high to low concentration. Now that we know how the process of diffusion works, why do you think this process is important for cells? Take a few minutes to discuss your ideas with a partner.
Ready. Begin. Time's up. Listen.
Welcome back, students. I wonder what some of your ideas were. Diffusion is important for cells because it allows them to get nutrients across the cell membrane by diffusion. Breathing in fresh air is an example of how diffusion functions. Air that is inhaled contains more oxygen than the blood inside the lungs. The oxygen moves from a region of high concentration to a region of lower concentration. It moves from the lungs into the bloodstream. Oxygen can then be carried through the bloodstream to the tissue. The carbon dioxide that is produced by the cells passes out by diffusion as well. Diffusion is a slow process. Some cells adapt to make diffusion more efficient. As the most common adaptation is an increase in the membrane. Since only a limited amount of particles diffuse over to take place, tissues and organs ensure diffusion happens efficiently. Before we conclude our lesson, an activity to review what we fill in the blanks with the correct
Students. Begin. Time's up. Let's get back to our lesson.